It was late September when I decided to hike part of the Shenandoah National Park trails before the weather turned too cold. I'd taken a few days off work and drove out early one morning with my pack, a tent, and enough food for 3 nights. The air that morning was cool, the kind that makes your breath come out in soft clouds. The road into the park wound through endless trees, all still holding their green but with the faintest edges of yellow and red. It felt like the season was hesitating, right on the edge of change but not quite ready yet. I started on the trail just after sunrise. The ground was damp from a night rain, and the forest was full of that heavy, earthy smell. Wet leaves, soil, and moss all mixing together. The first few miles were peaceful. Birds were just starting up, chipmunks darting across the path, and a steady sound of water running somewhere below the ridge. The forest there always has a way of feeling bigger than it looks on the map, like the trails go on forever, curling through the same repeating scenery. Trees, rocks, fallen logs, and silence. By mid-morning, I had settled into that hiking rhythm where you stop thinking about distance. My legs moved automatically, my mind drifting between the sound of my boots crunching gravel and the hum of the insects. I hadn't seen another person since I parked the car, and I was fine with that. The quiet was the reason I came out there. The first sign of the bear came around noon. I'd stopped to take a break, leaning against a fallen tree, when I heard a low rustling sound up ahead. It wasn't loud, just something big moving through leaves with no concern about being quiet. I froze, listening. The sound came again, heavier this time, followed by the unmistakable snap of a branch under weight. I walked slowly toward the bend in the trail, keeping my steps light. As I came around the curve, I saw it. A black bear sitting right off the side of the trail, maybe 30 feet away. It wasn't doing anything threatening. It was sitting on its backside like a person might, one paw holding a branch of leaves it was chewing on. His head turned slightly when it noticed me, but it didn't seem startled. It just stared for a second, then went right back to eating. I stopped immediately. My heart jumped, but there was no real panic. Not at first. I'd read about bears around Shenandoah before, how used to people they were, how most of them didn't even bother moving when hikers passed. Still, seeing one that close out in the open was different from reading about it. The bear was bigger than I expected. Its fur was thick and black, its body broad and round from summer eating. It looked comfortable, like it owned the place, which it did. I waited for it to move off the trail, but it didn't. It just sat there chewing, slow and lazy, like time didn't mean anything. I tried shifting my weight, stepping back quietly, but nothing changed. It wasn't afraid, not even curious. It just didn't care that I was there. Minutes passed. The wind barely moved, and the forest went still. I could hear the sound of the bear's chewing, the faint popping of leaves between its teeth. I remember thinking how absurd it looked, sitting there like some overfed animal in a zoo, except I was the one in its territory. After maybe 10 minutes, I decided to move around it. The trail was narrow, but off to the left was a steep slope that dropped into thick brush, and to the right, the ground rose sharply toward a ridge. There wasn't much room, but I figured if I kept my distance and moved slowly, I'd be fine. The bear watched me as I started to step off the path, but it didn't react. Kept chewing, staring with this flat, almost bored look. The ground was soft and uneven, and every step I took made a muffled crunch that sounded too loud in the quiet. My heart thudded in my ears. I tried to keep my breathing steady, one slow step at a time. When I was about 15 feet off the trail, I felt the slope start to give under my boot. The dirt was loose from the rain, and before I could catch myself, my foot slid out from under me. I went down hard on one knee, the sound of sliding gravel echoing through the trees. The bear's head shot up instantly. It didn't move right away, but its whole posture changed. Its body tensed, front paws flattening to the ground, ears angled forward. It wasn't charging, but it was alert now, focused. I froze, one knee still in the mud, not daring to move. We locked eyes for what felt like forever. In that moment, everything around me disappeared. The trees, the trail, even the sound of wind. All I could see was the bear's face, its eyes dark and steady. It wasn't angry, not exactly. It was more like it was calculating, trying to decide whether I was something worth paying attention to. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. After a few seconds, it stood up on all fours. The movement was slow but deliberate, its muscles shifting under thick fur. My stomach dropped. I could see the size of it clearly now, how easily it could cover the distance between us. I knew that if I made the wrong move, it could be over in seconds. Then, just as suddenly as it had tensed, it relaxed again. It turned slightly, gave a low grunt, and went back to chewing the leaves, like it had decided I wasn't a threat. I stayed frozen for another full minute before I finally pushed myself up and started backing away. My legs were shaking so bad it felt like they might give out again. Once I got back to the trail behind it, I took the long way around, keeping as much distance as I could. Every few steps I looked back. The bear hadn't moved. It just sat there, calm and indifferent, the way a cow might sit in a field. I walked faster until it was completely out of sight, but even then, I couldn't shake the feeling of those eyes watching me. The rest of the hike that day didn't feel the same. Every shape in the trees made me stop and look twice. Every noise in the brush made my heart jump. It wasn't fear in the movie sense, it was deeper than that. A kind of raw awareness that I was being tolerated, not safe. When I finally made camp that night, I couldn't relax. I built a small fire, but I barely used it. The forest around me was quiet, too quiet. Every once in a while, I'd hear the distant rustle of something big moving through leaves, and I'd freeze, staring into the dark. I told myself it was deer or raccoons, but the sound of heavy, slow steps didn't fit either of those. At one point, maybe an hour after dark, I heard a sharp crack not far from my tent. My whole body went rigid. I didn't unzip the tent or move. I just listened. The sound came again, then faded. I could hear my own heartbeat louder than anything else. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I just lay there, every sound stretching into something bigger in my mind. By morning, the fear had settled into exhaustion. The forest looked calm again, all the menace gone in daylight. I packed up and decided to cut the trip short. The trail back was quiet, and I didn't see a single animal the whole way. When I passed the spot where I'd seen the bear, there were fresh tracks in the mud. The prints were big, clean, and headed downhill away from the trail. I stopped and looked at them for a while, realizing how close I'd been. That encounter changed the way I see those woods. Before, I'd thought of the forest as peaceful, maybe even friendly. Now I know it's not that, it's neutral. Wild animals like that bear don't fear people anymore because too many have stopped treating them like wild creatures. They've become used to us, and that's not comfort. It's danger disguised as calm. I drove out of the park that afternoon, the silence of the trees still heavy in my head. Looking back through the mirror as the forest disappeared behind me, I realized how easily that moment could have gone another way. One wrong move, one louder noise, and that bear might not have just sat there chewing leaves. It wasn't kindness or indifference that kept me safe. It was chance. And ever since that day, whenever I step into the woods, I remind myself that the quiet isn't always peace. Sometimes it's a warning you only understand once you've been close enough to feel it breathing. It was early October when I decided to take a few days off and disappear into the Appalachian Mountains. The air had started to cool down, and that crisp bite in the wind made everything feel clean. I was about 3 days into a solo backpacking trip, moving along an old, overgrown trail that wound through thick forest and rocky slopes. The kind of place where sound doesn't carry far, where you can hear every twig crack under your boots and the soft hum of your own breath becomes company. That morning had started out calm. The air was still and damp, with a faint fog hanging between the trees. Everything felt muted, the colors, the sounds, even the wind seemed hesitant to move. My boots were wet from brushing against dew-covered ferns, and my pack straps were biting into my shoulders. I'd been walking for hours without seeing a single sign of another person. Just endless trees, slick with moisture, and the faint sound of a stream somewhere downhill. The trail wasn't well maintained. In some spots, fallen branches blocked the path, and I had to step around or climb over them. The smell of wet leaves and decaying wood hung heavy in the air, mixed with the earthy scent of mushrooms and moss. I could hear crows occasionally calling out in the distance, their voices echoing through the valleys. I remember thinking how peaceful it felt to be that far from everything. No cell service, no traffic noise, just the sound of my own steps crunching through damp leaves. I was rounding a bend in the trail, a tight, narrow curve that hugged the base of a small hillside, when everything changed. As soon as I turned the corner, I froze. Not because I wanted to, but because my body decided for me. About 40 feet ahead, standing broad and dark against the light-colored hillside, was a black bear. A big one, a sow. And just a few feet to her left, nosing around in the dirt, was a cub. It's strange how quickly fear can clear your mind. One moment I'd been thinking about where to set up camp, and the next, my entire body was locked in place, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my neck. The sow looked up from what she was doing, and for a second we just stared at each other. Her face was covered in mud, and her eyes were this deep, flat brown that didn't show emotion the way a human's would. But there was something in the way she looked at me that was unmistakable, a kind of warning that didn't need sound or movement. She didn't growl or huff. She didn't charge or stand up. She just looked at me with this expression that said everything I needed to know. I was in her space, and she was deciding whether or not I was a problem. I slowly stepped back, keeping my eyes on her, trying not to make any sudden moves. My throat felt tight, and every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew that was the worst possible thing I could do. So I just eased myself down onto a rock about 20 or so yards back on the trail. My legs were shaking as I crouched down, my pack pressing against the back of my neck. The cub kept pawing at the hillside, digging into the dirt and pulling up pieces of rotten wood. The sow went back to what she was doing too, occasionally sniffing the air but mostly ignoring me. She was digging into the slope with her claws, flipping rocks and clumps of earth over with this lazy, powerful motion. I could hear the tearing sound of soil breaking apart, the faint crunch as she found something beneath the dirt. Bugs, probably. Ants or grubs. I sat there watching, afraid to move, afraid to even breathe too loud. The snow hadn't started yet this far south, but the air had that heavy, damp cold that settles into your bones when you're still for too long. I could see the steam of my own breath drift in front of me, and I tried to keep it slow, steady. The forest was dead quiet except for the sound of her digging. Every few minutes, she'd stop and glance in my direction. Not aggressively, just checking. Each time she did, my body would stiffen all over again. I could see the size of her paws, the muscle shifting beneath her thick fur. Even from a distance, it was obvious how strong she was. She could have covered the space between us in seconds if she wanted to. Time moved strangely. It felt like an hour had passed, but later I realized it was probably closer to 20 minutes. I sat completely still, the cold creeping up my arms, my knees aching from staying crouched. I remember watching the cub climb up onto a fallen log, clumsy and curious, swatting at something in the dirt. The sow kept a low rumbling sound in her chest, a kind of warning hum that I could barely hear but definitely felt. I started to notice every small detail around me. The way the light filtered through the canopy, shifting with each breeze. The sound of melting water trickling through the ditch on the side of the trail. Even the smell changed slightly, damp soil mixed with the faint musk of the bears. It was raw, wild, and unmistakable. At one point, I realized how dry my mouth had gotten. I swallowed, but it didn't help. My heart had finally slowed down a bit, but the tension in my body hadn't gone anywhere. I remember thinking about all the stories I'd heard, how people accidentally get too close to cubs, how fast a bear can run, how quiet they can be for something that big. Every sound in the forest seemed magnified. A branch cracked somewhere behind me, and I nearly jumped, but it was just snow or a small animal moving in the brush. Eventually, the sow gave this kind of low exhale, almost like a sigh, and started nudging the cub up the hill. They moved slowly, the cub clinging to her side. She paused halfway up, looked down at me one last time, then turned and disappeared into the trees. No noise, no drama, just gone. For a minute, I sat there, staring at the spot where they'd been. My body didn't believe it was over yet. I waited another 5 minutes before I even tried to move. When I finally stood up, my legs felt weak, almost numb. I took a long breath and slowly backed away down the trail, making sure not to walk the same direction she'd gone. Once I was far enough away that I couldn't hear or see anything, I stopped and leaned against a tree. My hands were shaking hard enough that I could see them tremble. It hit me then just how close I'd been to something that could have killed me in seconds. Not out of malice, just instinct. I walked for another couple of miles before I found a good clearing to set up camp. I didn't build a fire that night. I didn't cook anything with a smell that would travel. I just sat in my tent, listening to the forest. Every sound made me alert. The crack of a branch, the wind brushing against the tarp, even the rustle of leaves sounded different. I couldn't stop replaying that moment in my head. The way she'd looked at me, calm but sharp, as if she was saying, "You're lucky today." Lying in my sleeping bag that night, I realized how small I really was out there, how fragile. It wasn't the kind of fear that fades quickly either. It was the kind that settles deep and stays with you. You don't forget what it feels like to lock eyes with something wild that powerful. Something that doesn't hate you but also doesn't care whether you live or die. The next morning, when the sun came up and the forest turned gold with light, I packed my things and started heading back towards civilization. The woods were quiet again, peaceful in a way that almost made me doubt what I'd seen. But as I passed that same bend in the trail, I saw the marks she'd left in the dirt. Deep gouges from her claws, a few turned-up rocks, and tracks leading up the hill. Proof she'd been real. Proof that I'd been there. I stopped for a moment, staring at the tracks, and felt this strange mix of fear and respect. I realized I hadn't just been lucky to walk away. I'd been allowed to. She'd chosen not to make me part of her story, and I'd never forget that. After that trip, I didn't stop hiking or camping, but I carried something different with me each time. A kind of quiet awareness. Out there, you're not in control. You're not the main character. You're just another piece of the landscape passing through, hoping the wild lets you go home in one piece. It was one of those heavy summer afternoons in Shenandoah National Park when the heat feels thick enough to grab. The air was humid, and the forest smelled like damp earth, pine needles, and that faint sweet rot of fallen leaves. I'd gone hiking with a couple of buddies that day, just a simple trail near the edge of Skyline Drive, one of those loops that winds through the woods before opening to a viewpoint. The kind of trail that's supposed to be easy, just some shade, some quiet, and a few miles to clear your head. By mid-afternoon, the forest was loud with insects. You could hear them buzzing in waves that rose and fell with the heat. Every now and then, a bird would let out a short, sharp cry, but mostly it was that steady hum of summer. The trail was narrow in places, with overgrown ferns brushing your legs and gnats sticking to your sweat. It wasn't the most peaceful kind of hike, but it felt good to move, to be surrounded by green that deep and endless. We'd seen the warning signs about bears back at the trailhead, but everyone always sees those. They're almost part of the scenery. White signs with bold letters reminding you to keep food sealed, stay aware, make noise. Most people just shrug and move on. The truth is, around Shenandoah, the bears are everywhere and they're used to people. Too many tourists, too many snacks, too many cameras. They've stopped caring. We were about halfway through the hike when it happened. The trail dipped slightly, curving between thick stands of trees, and the light dimmed as the canopy closed above us. I was in front, moving at an easy pace, when I spotted something black ahead on the path. At first, I thought it was a fallen log, maybe a tree trunk slick from rain. Then it moved. The bear was sitting right off the trail, maybe 20 or 30 feet ahead. It wasn't startled. It didn't even stand up. It was sitting on its ass, back straight, chewing lazily on a branch like it was a snack. The motion of its jaw was slow, deliberate, like it had all the time in the world. The thing that hit me hardest wasn't the size. It was the confidence. It looked like it owned the place. We froze where we were, not out of panic but confusion. I'd seen bears before, but always from far away or moving off fast through trees. This one didn't move at all. It just looked at us once, briefly, then went right back to chewing, like we weren't even worth acknowledging. The forest went completely still. No wind, no bird calls, nothing. The only sound was the faint crunching of leaves between the bear's teeth. It was surreal, watching this wild animal act so casual, so completely unbothered. Felt wrong, unnatural. The bear was supposed to care that we were there. I could feel sweat sticking to the back of my neck. My heartbeat wasn't wild yet, just steady and tight. I remember watching the light shift through the trees, patches of gold flickering on its fur. The bear was big. Not the biggest I'd ever heard of, but easily a few 100 pounds. Its shoulders were thick, its snout short and blunt, and there was something about its eyes that bothered me. They weren't angry or curious, they were empty, just dark, expressionless, like it had learned long ago that people didn't mean danger anymore. We waited, expecting it to move. Bears usually do. They get up, they shuffle off into the trees, maybe give you a huff if you're too close. This one didn't. A few minutes passed, and the tension turned awkward more than frightening. Still, none of us dared to speak or move much. I could feel my shirt clinging to my back from the humidity, the air too still to cool us. After maybe 10 minutes, the bear was still sitting there, chewing that same branch. The trail curved too tightly to go back easily, and we were too far in to just turn around without losing hours. We had to go forward eventually, so we decided to go around it, just a slow detour through the brush, keeping a safe distance. The ground off-trail was rough, uneven with roots, rocks, and slick leaves from recent rain. Every step made more noise than I wanted. The smell of the forest grew stronger there, damp soil, fungus, that thick green scent of life and decay mixed together. We tried to move quietly, but the forest never lets you be truly silent. I was watching my footing, trying not to trip, when I heard it, a sharp snort. I looked up, and the bear had turned its head toward us. It wasn't standing, but it was paying attention now. Its jaws stopped moving. The sound of its breath carried in the still air, a low, steady exhale that somehow sounded annoyed. I froze mid-step, one hand gripping a small tree to steady myself. The bear's eyes locked on us. For a moment, it felt like time stopped. I could feel my pulse pounding in my throat, that deep animal awareness that something much stronger than you is watching. It didn't charge. It didn't even move closer. It just stared, head tilted slightly, like it was daring us to keep going. Then, just as quickly, it turned away and went back to chewing, slow and unbothered again. We stood there for another long minute, making sure it was truly ignoring us this time, then kept moving. We stayed off the trail for a bit longer than we needed to, pushing through thorny brush and climbing over fallen logs. The air felt heavier with every step, like the forest itself was pressing in around us. I could feel a mix of relief and unease. Relief that nothing had happened, unease that it could have so easily gone the other way. When we finally rejoined the trail a few 100 yards ahead, I turned around and looked back. The bear was still visible through the trees, just a black shape sitting in the same spot, motionless except for the slow movement of its jaw. The way it sat there, indifferent, made my stomach twist. It wasn't scared. It wasn't curious. It just didn't care. That kind of apathy felt wrong in something wild. It meant too many people had come too close, too many had fed it or ignored the warnings. It wasn't just that it didn't fear humans. It had learned we didn't matter. And something about that was worse than aggression. A wild thing that doesn't care about danger doesn't behave predictably. We hiked the rest of the trail in silence. The forest seemed different after that. Quieter, but not peaceful. Every sound made me tense. Every movement in the trees made my stomach drop. By the time we reached the overlook at the top, the air felt cooler, and a light wind had started to move through the branches. The view stretched for miles, rolling green hills fading into the haze, but I couldn't shake the image of that bear sitting there, chewing leaves like some lazy animal in a park full of tourists. When we started heading back, the light had changed. The shadows were longer, stretching thin across the trail. I remember the uneasy feeling of realizing how quickly those woods can turn unfamiliar once the sun starts to drop. Every corner looked the same. Every patch of brush seemed too quiet. As we got closer to where we'd seen the bear, we slowed down instinctively. The forest had gone almost silent again. When we reached the spot, the bear was gone, but the ground told a story. The dirt was flattened where it had been sitting, leaves scattered, claw marks etched faintly into the soft soil. The smell of it still hung in the air, a mix of musk and something wild. We passed through carefully, watching the shadows between the trees. I kept expecting to hear that low snort again, or the sound of movement just beyond sight. But nothing came, just that oppressive stillness, heavy and watchful. When we finally got back to the trailhead, the air felt lighter, and the distant sound of cars along Skyline Drive felt strangely comforting. Civilization, safety. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my head. The way that Bear looked at us without fear, without care. It had been inches from wild danger, but it hadn't even seen us as a threat or a challenge. We were background noise. The next time I went hiking in Shenandoah, I noticed how many people were on the trails. Families laughing, kids running ahead, snacks in hand. And somewhere out there in the same woods, those bears still sat, chewing leaves, not giving a damn about any of it. It's strange how something so used to people can still make you feel so small, so out of place. That bear wasn't aggressive, but it didn't need to be. It reminded me that the line between safety and danger in the wild isn't drawn by distance. It's drawn by luck, by timing, by the thin mercy of an animal that decides you're not worth the trouble. And once you see that up close, once you realize how fragile your control out there really is, the forest never feels the same again. It was late summer in Texas, one of those sticky, hot nights where the air hangs heavy and even the breeze feels warm. I was camping at a state park that sat on the edge of a wide, shallow lake, the kind filled with cattails, reeds, and that thick marsh grass that seems to hum with life even in the dark. I'd been there for 2 days already. Nothing fancy, just a tent, a cooler, and my dog, a medium-sized mutt named Daisy. She was always calm around the water, and that night, after the sun dropped behind the trees, I decided to go down to the dock to do a little night fishing. The campground was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels full rather than empty. Crickets chirping, frogs croaking in the distance, and the faint rustle of something small moving through dry grass every now and then. The sky was black and wide, stars scattered everywhere, and the moon hung low enough that the water glowed faintly silver. I hopped on my bike, rod tucked under one arm, tackle box bumping against my leg as I pedaled down the cracked path that led toward the lake. The air smelled like mud and fish, a little sour from the heat. Daisy trotted alongside me, her tags jingling softly with each step. When we got close, I left the bike leaning against a signpost in the parking lot about 100 feet from the dock. The dock itself stretched out into the shallows, with maybe 20 or 30 feet of wet, marshy grass and soft mud before the woods started to lift above the waterline. I remember the feeling of the boards creaking under my boots as I walked to the end. The dock lights were old and dim, one of them flickering off and on like it couldn't decide whether to die completely. I set my tackle box down, tied on a lure, and cast out into the dark water. The line slapped the surface with that soft plop, and then the ripples faded into stillness. Daisy lay down beside me, panting quietly. The lake was perfectly calm. Not a single breeze moved across it, and every sound seemed to echo a little too clearly. I could hear insects humming and the occasional plunk of something, maybe a frog or turtle, dropping into the water. I sat there for about 20 minutes, content, half watching the stars reflect in the lake's surface. That was when I noticed the shape. It was subtle at first, just a darker patch among the dark water, slowly gliding toward me. I thought it might be a log, driftwood carried by some slow current. But then it shifted direction, straight toward the dock. I squinted, leaning forward slightly. The light from the dock caught the surface just enough that I saw two faint orange glints appear, eyes. They shone for a split second and then disappeared beneath the surface before reappearing a little closer. Took me a few seconds to realize what I was looking at. An alligator, a big one. I've seen gators before in Texas. Small ones near the edges of creeks or basking on muddy banks. But this one was something else. It looked massive, thick-bodied, moving so slowly and quietly that if not for the faint reflection of its eyes, I would have missed it. It glided in a straight line toward the dock like it was being pulled by a string. Daisy lifted her head and let out a low whine. She didn't bark, just stared. Her body was stiff, ears forward. I laid a hand on her back to calm her, though my own heart was starting to pick up. The gator drifted closer until I could make out more of its shape under the light, rough scales, broad head, long tail just breaking the surface. It looked like a whole tree trunk floating there. I figured it had been drawn by the sound of my lure splashing when I cast, maybe thinking it was prey. I reeled my line in slowly, not wanting to splash again, and set the rod aside. For a moment, the gator just hovered there near the dock, half submerged, its eyes just above the surface, locked on me. We stayed like that for what felt like minutes but was probably 30 seconds. My stomach felt tight, my mouth dry. Then, as if deciding I wasn't worth the effort, it drifted sideways, moving slowly along the edge of the dock. Every time I shifted positions, walking a few steps one way or the other, it followed, never closer than about 10 feet from the edge, just cruising alongside me, keeping pace. I fished for another couple of hours after that, trying to ignore it. The longer it hung around, the less I could convince myself it was just curious. It didn't go anywhere. It didn't lose interest. Whenever I changed spots, it followed. Sometimes it would sink low enough that its eyes disappeared, and I'd lose sight of it for a few minutes. Then it would surface again, closer than before, the water barely rippling around it. The sound of frogs had died off completely by then, as if the entire lake had gone still. Even the air felt thicker. Every now and then, a mosquito would buzz near my ear, and I'd slap it away, the sharp sound of my hand echoing strangely loud in the stillness. I remember glancing at my watch and realizing it was well past midnight. My legs were stiff, and the air had cooled slightly. I figured it was time to pack up and head back. The gator was still there. When I stood up and reeled my line in for the last time, it turned with me, slow but deliberate. I coiled the line, slipped my rod through my pack strap, and looked toward the parking lot where my bike sat. It wasn't far, maybe 100 feet, but to get there I'd have to cross that stretch of marshy shoreline. The dock didn't reach dry land. It stopped a good 20 feet before the actual shore began, the rest covered in that knee-high, wet grass and soft mud that made every step sink. I glanced down at Daisy. She was standing now, tail low, staring into the water. I followed her gaze, and sure enough, the gator had shifted again. Now it was at the base of the dock, half in the shallows, waiting. A cold, crawling fear moved through me then. I wasn't used to feeling small, but in that moment I did. I knew gators could move fast on land when they wanted to, and that distance between me and the bike suddenly felt enormous. Worse, I knew Daisy would never run from a threat. If that thing came out after us, she'd stand her ground, and there'd be no saving her. I needed to distract it somehow. My brain was working too fast to think clearly, so I just acted. I walked quietly to the far end of the dock, the opposite side from the path to the parking lot, and faced the water. The gator followed my movement again, slow and deliberate. I unzipped and pissed into the water. Sounds stupid, but it was all I could think of. The sound of the stream hitting the lake surface was loud, echoing in the silence. For a few tense seconds, nothing happened. Then the gator shifted toward that end of the dock, drawn by the noise and the ripples. Its head turned slightly, body angling that way. I could see its tail move like a slow, dark wave. That was my chance. I turned and whispered Daisy's name under my breath, clapping softly once to get her attention. Then I took off running down the dock. My boots pounded the old wood, each step echoing in the still night. Daisy stayed right at my side, her nails clicking fast. The second my feet hit the mud, I didn't stop. The ground sucked at my shoes, water splashing up my legs, the smell of rot thick in my nose. My bike came into view through the dark, leaning against the post. I grabbed the handlebars, shoved my pack into the front basket, and jumped on without even catching my breath. I pushed off hard, the tires spitting mud, and pedaled faster than I ever had in my life. Daisy sprinted beside me, tongue out, still silent. Behind me, I heard the splash, loud and deep, followed by the distinct thrashing sound of water breaking apart. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. I knew what it was. We rode all the way back to the campsite before I stopped. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the kickstand down. Daisy was breathing hard but still wagged her tail once she realized we were away from the water. That night, lying in my tent, I couldn't shake the sound of that splash. I could see those glowing eyes in my head, the way it had tracked every move I made for hours. I'd always thought of gators as slow, lumbering things, but that night taught me otherwise. They wait, they watch, and they don't forget what's in their territory. The next morning, when I went back to the dock to grab a lure I dropped, I noticed the muddy shoreline near the base. There were fresh drag marks, deep, wide streaks where something heavy had crawled through the grass. They led straight up to the spot where I'd been standing. After that, I never fished alone at night again. The lake looked calm and harmless in the daylight, but I knew what had been hiding just beneath it. It wasn't anger or hunger that scared me. It was patience, that silent, perfect patience that waits for one wrong move. I had gone out into the woods alone that weekend to get away from everything. No big reason, just needed to clear my head. I'd been working too much, sleeping too little, and it had all started to blur together. I figured a few days away from cell service and noise might help. I picked a remote area in northern Arkansas, where the forest stretched for miles without a hint of pavement. The plan was simple: hike a few miles in, set up camp near a stream I'd found on a map, and stay there for 2 nights. Nothing complicated. The drive in took most of the day. I reached the trailhead around 4 in the afternoon, the sun already starting to dip behind the trees. The air was thick with that late summer humidity that clings to your skin. The woods smelled of pine, dirt, and that faint sourness of decaying leaves. I parked, shouldered my pack, and started walking. The trail was narrow, half overgrown in places, the dirt soft underfoot. My boots made dull, steady thuds as I went. I could hear insects buzzing around me, cicadas droning in waves, and the occasional flap of wings when a bird took off somewhere above. I remember the light starting to change, filtering through the canopy in broken patches. Everything had that golden hue that only lasts an hour before dark. I hiked for a while without thinking much, just falling into rhythm. Every now and then I'd stop to take a drink or shift my pack, listening to the stillness settle back in each time. Around 6, I reached a spot that felt right. A small clearing surrounded by tall pines, the ground mostly flat, a creek running just a short walk downhill. The air felt cooler there, and the sound of the water was soft but constant, a sort of background whisper. I set up camp, pitched my tent, gathered wood, and got a small fire going before it went completely dark. Once the fire crackled, I felt more relaxed. I cooked a quick meal from one of the pouches I'd brought, watched the smoke drift up through the trees, and just sat there listening to the forest come alive with night sounds. By the time I crawled into my tent, the temperature had dropped enough that I needed my sleeping bag. The fire had burned down to glowing coals, and the forest beyond was pitch black. I could hear the faint rustle of animals moving through the undergrowth, small ones mostly. The usual night sounds felt normal, safe enough. Sometime deep into the night, though, I woke up suddenly. I didn't know why at first. It wasn't a dream. It was something else. That half-alert feeling when your body knows something's wrong before your brain catches up. I lay there, completely still, breathing slow. The woods outside were silent. No insects, no frogs, nothing. Just this absolute, suffocating quiet. Then I heard it, footsteps. Not heavy, but definitely human. Slow, uneven steps on dry leaves, not far from my tent. Crunch, pause, crunch. They were deliberate, cautious. My stomach twisted immediately. I was miles from any road, and no other campers were around. I'd seen no one all day. There was no reason for anyone to be out there. I tried to tell myself it could have been an animal. A deer, maybe, but the steps were too steady, too rhythmic. They moved closer, stopped, then started again. I could hear my own heartbeat now. I slowly reached for the knife I kept near my sleeping bag, the one I used for cutting rope or cooking. My hand shook as I wrapped my fingers around the handle. The steps circled the tent once, very slowly. I could hear the sound of fabric shifting faintly as something brushed near the wall. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe for a few seconds. The quiet between the steps was worse than the sound itself. After what felt like forever, the noise faded into the woods again. The silence came back. I lay there for hours, too scared to move. Every time a leaf shifted outside, I flinched. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep. When morning came, the light through the tent walls felt like a relief. I unzipped the flap and looked around. Everything looked normal. My fire pit was cold, the trees still, the ground covered in dew. But when I stepped out, I noticed something right away. Footprints. Not boots, not bare feet, just a pair of old, worn shoe prints in the soft dirt. They went right up to the side of my tent, circled around, then disappeared back into the trees. I followed them a few feet into the woods before they vanished into dry leaves. I stood there for a while, heart still beating too fast. I told myself it could have been some late hiker who lost his way, maybe just curious when he saw my fire. That made sense enough to keep me calm. I packed up slowly, ate some breakfast, and decided to stay another night but keep my fire smaller. The day went by quietly. I fished for a while at the creek, walked around a bit, and tried not to think about it. By the time evening came, I was back at camp, sitting by the small fire I'd built. The woods were alive again. Crickets, frogs, the occasional hoot of an owl. It all felt normal again. But when I turned in that night, something didn't feel right. I couldn't shake the thought of those footsteps. I kept the knife next to me again, within reach. It must have been around midnight when I woke up to the sound again. But this time it was different. The first thing I noticed was the breathing. Slow, steady, just outside the tent. Not mine. Then came the sound of fabric shifting again. Something brushing the tent wall gently, like a hand sliding down it. The nylon rippled slightly with each movement. Every muscle in my body tensed. My hand found the knife again. I held it close, breathing shallow. My brain was running through every possibility. Someone lost, a drunk camper, a ranger, but none of it fit. Nobody would be out there like that, moving that slow, that quietly. Then I heard the sound of something metallic. Faint, like a buckle or clip brushing against another piece of metal. That sound made my blood go cold. Whoever it was, they were carrying something. Maybe a bag. Maybe worse. The breathing stopped. For a few seconds, it was completely still again. Then footsteps. Soft, but moving away this time. Slow. Controlled. They stopped a short distance away. Then nothing. I lay there for the rest of the night, knife in hand, eyes wide open, counting the seconds until I could see daylight again. When the sun finally rose, I unzipped the tent and stepped out, expecting to see the same thing as before. But this time, the footprints were different. There were more of them. They came from deeper in the woods, stopped near my tent, and went back again. But what really made my stomach drop was the mark on the side of the tent itself. A faint, oily handprint, just above where my head had been when I was lying inside. I packed up as fast as I could after that. I didn't eat, didn't even take down my fire ring. I just shoved everything into my pack, grabbed my knife, and started hiking back toward the trailhead. The forest felt different that morning. Too quiet again, like it was holding its breath. Every sound made me whip my head around. About halfway back, I noticed something else. Another footprint. Fresh. The same tread pattern. It was off the trail in a patch of mud between roots, facing the direction I was walking. I didn't stop after that. I moved faster, barely noticing the weight of my pack. My clothes were soaked with sweat by the time I reached the parking lot, and when I finally saw my car, I felt this wave of relief hit me so hard I almost laughed. But when I got closer, the feeling vanished. There was mud on the driver's side door, smudged, like someone had run their hand across it. I don't remember unlocking the door or even getting inside. I just remember the engine starting and the sound of gravel kicking under my tires as I pulled out. When I got home later that evening, I noticed something else that still makes my stomach twist even now. My backpack, tied to the roof rack for the drive, had been unzipped. Nothing inside was missing, but it was open. I still don't know who was out there, A hunter, maybe, a squatter, or someone worse. But ever since that trip, I don't camp alone anymore, because I realized something simple out there in those woods. Silence isn't peace. It's the sound of someone else listening.